budget meeting to order. If I could have Councillors Aquilina and Beauregard move the agenda. Are there any questions to the agenda or changes? All in favor? That's carried. Are there any disclosures of interest? Seeing none. Staff reports, Mr. Bowles, item 4.1, the 2024 rates budget, 2023-164.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have a presentation. I apologize. There's a lot going on. I think it's about 50 slides. So some of them you've seen before from the previous presentation. So we'll skip over a couple, or we'll go kind of fast through a couple, but some we'll spend quite a bit of time discussing tonight. I'm fully expect that. Does my clicker work? I didn't do something right. I think it's on. I might need your help. So the next slide, the very first slide we have for tonight, will actually talk about what the actual rate budget, what we're trying to do the rate budget. So what we're trying to do is set the budget for 2024. Council, remember a couple years ago, we made the motion, we made the goal to have our budgets done before the end of the fiscal year, and they will become effective for January 1 of the next year. So when we build this budget, I just want to highlight that staff do a great job of making their estimates, but actual results do change or do adjust a little bit from the forecasts and actuals, and we'll even go over this year's actuals and forecasts for the 2023 year as well. So if I have the next slide. The next slide really just lays out our agenda. Our agenda tonight is really to look at some of the city fundamentals, look at our budget, where it sits right now. We're going to look at some of the details, and then we're even going to look into some of the billing and how we can maybe make some improvements to our billing process. And I might have my clicker now. I do. So for the very first section, when we look at the budget summary, I'll start with the report that you have tonight, and this is the recommendation for tonight, is that the Corporate Service Department Financial Service Division Report 2023-164 be received and ultimately for it to be approved. But as we've identified in the report, it ultimately will be dependent upon what Council's questions are tonight, and Council has the ability to make amendments or adjust as required. As we put forward this budget tonight, we just remind Council, and I know Council is well aware, our mission, our vision, our corporate values are centered to us building our budget process. And our strategic alignment is right in step with the goals of climate change, welcoming and a healthy community, trying to build an economic and prosperous community. Our goal is still increased housing options and a sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And we accomplish this by concentrating on our people, trying to keep things and make things simpler, doing projects of value to make sure that we're achieving the requirements of our customers. And just to align this before we get too far into the details of the budget, a couple of the key areas where this budget really does touch on our strategic initiatives is with respect to sustainable and resilient infrastructure. Council's already approved a grant application for $32 million that we've sent in for the Disaster Mitigation Adaptability Fund. We still don't have any word on that. I suspect that's probably going to be a question tonight. We don't have any word on that, but this budget does include, and we've talked about this for the last couple of council meetings, that we would be including the funding to move forward with that in this budget. This budget also includes the funding which we passed at the capital budget to do $10 million worth of lining. It does about 1/3 of the city's wastewater system, and that will happen over about 3 years starting in 2024. As well as it does include funding for a number of projects that we can talk about tonight, Erie Street being one of them, but there was also a $5 million program that Council, remember, it was passed about 2 years ago, and we were funding it over 5 years, partly from grant funding and partly from the rate budget. And that's for a number of water projects, which we'll talk about in more detail as we go through. Just as a reminder, when we go forward with the sustainability and resilient infrastructure side, we did set some goals. And I just put in here, and I know there's a lot on the slide, but the reminder that a definition, when you see 20%, so if you see that our useful life on our assets are 20% or less, that means they're rated as very poor. And if you look on the measurement side, on the left-hand side, we're not doing too bad with storm sewers. About 96% are in great shape. 4% are in very poor shape. The problem on stormwater, which we'll talk about tonight, is the city only has 1/3 of the city with designed stormwater system. 2/3 of the city actually doesn't have a designed stormwater system, which is one of the complexities, and I know Councillor Bruno has brought it up many times before. We have to fix the stormwater for water to go somewhere, not to put it into the wastewater side. On the wastewater side, about 80% is above very poor, 20% is rated as 20 poor, and on the water side, actually, if you look at the ratings of the system, about 36% of the piping is in that very poor category. And that's why when we go through the discussion tonight, you'll see that the rate increase is tied to really two things. It's tied to the Niagara region and the payments we make to the Niagara region, and it's tied to increasing the capital fund to actually attack some of the infrastructure that needs to be improved. And you can see down there below in the dollar figure, so the total dollar figure estimated replacement cost of very poor, based on the asset management study, is actually $140 million of work to do. Now, one of the unique things, because Public Works has designed a mechanism to reline, not just do a full replacement of wastewater, and you can see wastewater has about $46 million in very poor, we will actually be able to give you revised numbers over a period of time that will show we're not going to have to spend the $48 million. Public Works will be able to say we won't have to spend $48 million to remove that out of the very poor category, because relining can happen at a significantly reduced price to a full replacement. So I just wanted to make that clear. Those dollars up there are based on full replacement, but when you do something like relining, you can do it for, Director of Public Works can remind me, I think it's about a third of the cost of actual doing a full replacement. So we'll get much more bang for our buck with the program that Council's approved. The next slide really talks about sustainable and resilient infrastructure again, and just a couple things. We, as a city council, approved some goals that by 2040, we want to bring our water to wastewater ratio down to 1. Right now, we're about 2.7. So for every liter we sell to a household, to a business in this city, we send 2.7 liters of water back to the waste treatment plant. And that's where about, like if you do some estimates, that means about 80% of everything that's going back to the waste treatment plant is from rain, it's from lakes, it's from groundwater, it's I&I. And that's why fixing the storm sewer system is, and building a storm sewer system where we don't have one, is so important in this city. As well as our water loss ratios, and we've done some revised information. So the unaccounted for water right now, we would say is about 30%. So if you buy a liter from the region, about 30% of that is unaccounted. Now some of that might be because of a number of factors. Maybe I'll leave that as we go through the presentation. And one other area is sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And this is, again, one of the projects that Council's approved. It's in our strategic plan, and we are working on it. Our manager of strategic initiatives has taken the lead and actually has this project underway, where we're looking at development charges. We have development charges, but we're looking at normalizing those to similar to what other cities in the Niagara region and across the province have. So that way we ensure growth pays for growth. So as the city continues to grow, it's not the current homeowners that's paying for the infrastructure for water and wastewater for them. As well as if we need to upsize a pipe because of it, sometimes there's like a benefit because the upsize pipe can be paid for through some of those growth initiatives. So before I maybe stop for questions, I'll just go over at a real high level. The budget continues to allow the city to continue to move forward in the direction it is. There's a couple, I guess, significant things that are in there that I'd just like to point out to council and anybody that may be watching. The city does have a backflow and disconnect grant program. The funding and the dollar figures isn't a huge amount of money, but it is an amount of money. The uptake isn't that great. Between the lateral program and the backflow and disconnect, I think the combined number of individuals or households that took us up on it was about 8 in the last year, and that's something that we really need to look at improving. We do have, and we brought that in when we went to the full fixed fee model for wastewater, knowing that the majority of wastewater bill was I&I that we're all responsible for. The guaranteed income supplement grant that we brought in, we actually have 134 participants on that guaranteed income supplement grant. We also have the pre-authorized payment, which is encouraging people not to take the paper bills going forward, and that program has grown thanks to customer service quite substantially over the last year. And then I do highlight for council, I think the centerpiece and what staff has put forward is with the DMAF grant and the wastewater lateral grants. So maybe just a long budget highlights just to remind people just what the DMAF grant is, and then we'll stop. So the DMAF grant really is 32 million. There's 3 areas, you can see them on the slides there, and there's 3 main components: sewer outlet protection, sewer outlet pumping, and sewer and sub pump drains, all in those core areas. And there was a timeline. This was a timeline that we presented, but we know that we've also promised council that once we get kind of the go-ahead for that to come in, that we would look to truncate and get this done faster, because we need to get to the next phases quicker. And then, I will stop right there before we get into some more of the budget details. I don't know if there's any questions. I know it was a high-level overview of our strategic, our strategic plan, our strategic initiatives, and how they tie into this budget, and then we'll get into the details. But if there's any questions of council right now, happy to take a couple.
Thanks, Mr. Bowles. I'll start on my left. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Brian. Just to back to the sustainable and resilient infrastructure and the measures. Remaining asset life of 20% or greater in all the categories. We got 96%, 80%, and 64% of all the assets are greater than 20%. What percentage of that, though, is on the low end of the scale?
Through the mayor to the councillors, so I'll give it a shot, and then I'm going to ask our director of public works maybe to help me in case I explain this wrong. When we say that 20% number, we're saying that that means you're at the very poor, that's the lowest level of the scale. So I know when we put the 64% there, that means everything, 64% is above the lowest end. So I'll flip the math around. That means 36% of all the pipes in the city on the water side are at the lowest end of the rating scale. So this is why when we put forward the budget, and we know it's a significant increase, the investments are needed because we need to get off of the lowest end in order to stop the water loss.
Okay, so what I was kind of looking at was if 20% is the dividing line, and we've got 36% that are 20% or under, and we'll take the water assets, right? So of the 64% that qualify over the 20%, what percentage of that is in the 20 to 30% range? So we've got 64% that are better than terrible, but how much above terrible is the 64%?
Through you, Your Worship. So according to our asset management plan, we do have about 36% of the water system would be in very poor condition, which would be that under 20%.
Yeah.
Poor would be the next 20 to 40% category, and that's at 5%.
Okay, so we're not on the verge of having the 36% bad
Correct.
Jump up to it's 50, 60%. So okay, that's what the buffer I was looking at, because year over year, some of the infrastructure is going to deteriorate and get closer down to the 20%. And I was just wondering how soon are we going to be flipped around in those numbers if we don't start repairing things? So that's what I was looking at.
Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. I'm not sure where to start tonight. Maybe some of it will dovetail off of Councillor Elliott's comments. Brian, this was a very good report, and the background information, a lot of which we've seen before. I just want to double check my numbers. So our unaccounted for water is up, and our infiltration is up, correct?
Yes.
And really, it's a 14% increase because I think you've absorbed some of that. Is that correct? Is that why it's 12 and a 14% number elsewhere?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councillor and council, that is correct, and I don't know how we want to proceed. We do have some slides that will help highlight some of that, like that 14% and what drives the budget as we go through, but happy to take those questions now. But what the council is referring to, and as we go through the presentation, you'll see that our budget to the Niagara region, we're budgeting to pay the Niagara region 14% more in 2024. And that is because, well, the region's budget went up, I think it was 7.95%. Our water loss grew in the last year, and the amount of water that we sent to the waste treatment plant grew. So we don't just have to pay the increase year over year, but we have to pay an increase because we have increased volume issues. So that's where the 14%. So the differential does get absorbed in other areas, and ultimately as we go through, you'll see that we actually are down 2 people in the water budget. We are relying on some cost sharing between the levy and the water on this. Not that the levy's subsidizing it, but the city has done everything it can to cushion that 14% increase. So I might be out of step with my presentation, but trying to answer your question, and we'll definitely see some more slides on it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You know, looking at those numbers you provided us is looking at the world correctly, but it's looking at it through the rearview mirror. What is the regional forecast increase for next year? I believe they did more than a 1-year plan.
Yeah, through the mayor to the councillor. So it's my understanding that the region's long-term plan for waste water, which is our biggest cost driver, is 10% going forward annually.
So based on the numbers I've seen, no matter whether it's up or down on infiltration or on water, it's pretty easy to see that 50% or better is unaccounted for water in terms of cost and unaccounted for wastewater. So that being the case, if we just use the number 50% and the region is going up 10% next year, before we start 2024, if that's 50% of our costs, that means you're going to start this presentation next year, if nothing else changes here, at a 5% increase. So and that's before you do the city, because you got a 10% increase coming, and over 50% of water and wastewater is loss. So just at the outset, before January 1 hits, 5%, in my view, is in the bag for next year. Now, I've been through 4 different engineers. I've seen all these studies, and none of these numbers seem to be improving greatly. And I've said something, I should have just put it on recording 4 years ago. You cannot study yourself to death without also fixing lines in the meantime. In 5 years, all I remember with a lot of slugging was to get Erie Street, the worst street in the city with breaks, brought forward with some pushback. And thank God it's done, because these numbers would have been higher on water, because that was the worst street. So I've read your report, and the only thing lacking is dates, and this may go to Councillor Elliott's point, is dates on when some of this stuff is going to start. Because I can ask the question, when is Davis Street, when is Homewood, the streets that are in the bag, when are they going to start? And maybe I should be doing that, and I am out of order here in terms of your presentation. But you can't expect all these lines above 36% that are good to be doing anything but getting worse until they're fixed. And as much as I applaud everybody's effort to get these studies done, to have a better outcome, we've got so many streets that have got so many problems in them. As an engineer and as a team, you can't lose no matter which street you pick, because they're all leaking. And so, you know, I'm all for trying to get a pecking order, but until you start a project, these numbers are going to go up. And I think 12% might be on the low side next year. And so until there's a shovel in the ground and a line going in, all this infrastructure just keeps aging.
Councillor, so when the report's on the floor, you can,
When the report is what?
once the report's on the floor, so we want them to go through this presentation. So we're looking at questions. So if you have a question, go ahead, but as far as commenting, bring your comments later.
So I'll wait if that's going to come up.
Yeah, just, it's questions at this time, so.
Well, that's the one question,
Comments-
Mr. Bowles,
comments-
that's it, just
Yeah.
what the rate is going up next year. I'll follow that up with some other things.
Thanks, Councillor. Questions, Council? Councillor Borgard.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. Actually, I'm not sure if this is better for Steve or for you, but you mentioned the relining of the pipes and for 1/3 of the municipality. What's the life expectancy for those pipes once the lining is put in?
Mr. Szapowski.
Through Your Worship, you could expect to see about 50 to 60 years at least.
Okay.
So that question.
Yeah, questions, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Szapowski. Is lining to extend the length of a pipe's life, or is it to stop infiltration?
Mr. Szapowski.
Through you, Your Worship. So it will actually do both. So one of the main benefits to it is able to stop the inflow and infiltration, because you're putting a single liner through, which will seal the pipe. But at the same time, it does extend the useful life of the system as well.
The reason I asked that question is because I called someone today who knows people in that business, and their response was, lining's a great thing to extend the life of a pipe, but infrastructure repair is there to replace infiltration. So if you don't get the I&I right, you can't count on they talked about 2 different kinds of lining that's needed to do that. So I'd like to bring you that person for a sit-down conversation, because I'm worried that this solution may not be all it's cracked up to be, but I'll let the professionals talk to you about it. Thank you.
Perfect. Questions, Council? Brian, go ahead.
Thank you. Just good. So as we get into the rate budget, and I think council and anybody reading the report would have identified right off the hop that the rate impacts are maybe a little bit more than what people are I maybe would have thought going in, but I think the councillor with his questions actually highlighted where a big part of that increase is coming from. And we identified on the right-hand side, there's actually 2 areas, and one is either the Niagara Region treatment costs, and the other one is capital infrastructure. And council might remember when we did the capital budget a couple months ago, we identified that the water, wastewater, and storm sewer capital budgets were almost zero in 2020 because we were running the system at a loss and we needed the funds to maintain the system. As we go through this now, you're going to see that there actually is significant dollars in there to make significant progress. And I think, just to put it, since the question was asked, I know the Director of Public Works told me today that, and this might help as we go through the lining project, or at least our first test part of the city for lining, I think is scheduled to begin on December 8th. So it was good to hear that initial infrastructure was going to start quicker, I think, than what people might have thought it was going to start. So next couple of slides really just talk a little bit about the process. We have done the capital budget, we've done the levy budget, now we're doing the rate budget. If council approves the rate budget today, it will then go to council for final approval. As a reminder, with the municipal, in the municipal process, we go to a budget review committee. That is what we're doing today, and then we go back to council. And we thank the clerk for turning over everything as quickly as she does between the cycles. I've shown this before, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but this is the comparison of our property taxes to other areas, and then you have to add our storm. Not every area, not every comparator has a storm sewer fee. That's why we added on as an addition. And then our water and wastewater rates, and I always point out that our water rates are higher, but it's the wastewater rate that's really the higher area, and that's where the majority of our difference between what other cities are paying. But when you add everything together, because our property taxes, when you combine education, region, our taxes, plus the water and the storm sewer fee, we have been still in aggregate a little bit lower than the average across the Niagara region. If you remember, I just thought this was important because a big part of this budget is about putting money into the ground to fix the infrastructure. And this was really talking about the fact that there is a plan out there. We are looking at the potential for our costs in the system, unless we make adjustments, growing by 10 to 12% over the next 10 years. And just mathematically, as an illustration, if we don't invest now to fix the infrastructure, it is not inconceivable that we could be looking at $2,600 to even $3,000 for a wastewater bill in 10 years from now. So the investments today to stop the I&I is exceptionally important. Our hope is we can draw that line down back closer to an average of what the rest of the region would experience on a growth line. And then if you look at the impact, I talked about this during the capital budget as well, the impact of doing nothing. What we have seen, and you can see in capital projects over time, is the cost of construction inflation has often outpaced the cost of interest rates, at least in the last 20 or 30 years. And in doing so, by waiting and delaying infrastructure, we actually are just making it more costly to fix infrastructure at a later date going forward. And then just a little bit more on the process. We have identified the risks for council. There are lots of risks in a budget as we go forward, whether it be regulation, whether it be weather, and we have a number of slides that show how weather impacts our flows going forward. That was just a couple of last comments about the process before we get into forecasting and where we are right now and what our affordability metrics are to move forward with the water wastewater budget. I don't know if there's any more questions just on the budget process.
Questions on the process, Council?
Okay. Thank you. So as a high level, as we get into the budget, I thank the communications team for doing these slides. It's a comparison of kind of where the dollars are spent at a graphical level between 2023 and 2024. On the water, I really just want to highlight, you can see it right at the top, the capital budget was 13% of the budget in 2023. It'll now be 21% of the budget in 2024. We are focusing, and this budget is growing to an all-capital budget to be able to do infrastructure going forward. That was the big highlight on that one. On the wastewater, it's a little trickier to see because you have to add a couple numbers together, because you'll notice in 2023, there was zero borrowing. We have never borrowed any money to fix the wastewater system in Port Colborne. So in this budget, when we said that we were going to go do the lining project, we said we would borrow to do it. So if you take the 7.9 and add the borrowing percentage of 7.5, you'll see a combined increase of about 15% over the 10% in the prior year. The majority of this increase, outside of having to pay for the region's cost, but you can see the majority of it is going into infrastructure. And then on the storm sewer budget, we're going from, you have to add, the borrowing costs versus the capital year over year. We're going from about 67% combined in 2023 to 74% in 2024. Again, the costs that are going into the system are going into infrastructure. That's where all the costs have been pushed. Council's seen this before. As we're going forward and we're building this budget, we are concentrating on where the growth area is going to be. I appreciate Public Works. On Monday, they walked me through their infrastructure needs study maps, which I understand they're going to be proposing that we're going to have either it'll come to the council meeting in December or maybe a special council meeting if we can work that out in December to give council the ability to ask a number of questions based on the maps of where the work is going to happen with respect to this infrastructure funding. And then at a very high level, and I know you have the data in front of you, it might be a little bit easier to read. We have highlighted not just the budget, but also the forecast. There is a slight deficit on the forecast. It really is a function of just payment variability between customers for the majority of what that is. It's nothing like fundamental to the overall budget, but you are going to have estimate differentials from year to year. When I look at the budget, just a couple things that I wanted to point out on a highlight that we'll talk about at a high level, and this is the budget for all three rate budgets together, because sometimes people ask me, what do we do on the storm? What's the wastewater? What's the water? When you add them all together, how big is it? And you can see the total budget in 2024 will be about $16.6 million. And a couple of highlights is we are down 2 head counts. I might have misquoted. We're going from 11 to 9 in the head count side. We are phasing in our grant program over a period of time. We did the laterals because we did part of it the previous year. We did the rest of it this year. The borrowing costs have been included in this, and you can see the borrowing costs go up quite a bit, and that's again for the 1/3 of the city's wastewater lines. All the Niagara Regional increase costs. So that's where you actually can see, and I think Councillor Bruno caught me a little bit off guard at the beginning of the presentation that he picked that right up out of that slide, but you can see the Niagara Region costs are going up 14.4%. So what we're going to pay the Niagara Region next year is $1,051,000 for our water wastewater program in combined. And then we have increased the reserves, and you might be seeing that there's a large transfer to reserves. Sometimes people worry, are you just banking the money for something? The reason that was strategically done, because we have to put the money into reserves to get that DMAF grant to then match. So it's not that we're going to sit it there and it's not going to be deployed. It will be deployed. This is just a timing thing to when you deploy that. And maybe I'll stop before I go into the debt, because there's a lot on that slide. I don't know if anybody has any question. I do have slides later that go into water, wastewater, and storm specifically, but this is just at an aggregate level. If there's a question by council at the aggregate level.
Questions? Councillor Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm safe because he mentioned lateral lines. So I did send an email to yourself and the Director of Public Works requesting how much in 2022-23 that our residents use the grant/loan program to change their lateral lines and their sewer lines. Is that information anywhere? I didn't see have a reply, so.
Through the mayor to the councillor, I apologize if not having replied, but I do have the answer. 7 on water and 8 on wastewater. So the uptick was not significant, and I think that's what council should be aware. I have a slide later that talks about maybe adding another $1,000 to the grant, and I think the Director of Public Works might even like to talk a little bit more about the importance of laterals and what the council may want to look at as future adjustments to lateral fixes down the road.
I can wait till then, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Brian, and I'll get the Director of Public Works in on it too. So you're talking about creating more incentive for the laterals. Have you identified that as a place of concern that we are losing water, and that's why the push is on? And do you have any estimate of how much we're losing through laterals and what this may save us?
Mr. Szapowski.
Yes, through your worship. So right now we have identified as the laterals as one of the top priorities that we have on the wastewater system. What we've done is we've kind of gone through a multi-pronged approach where we're first tackling the sanitary mains themselves as the biggest culprits. So as we work through that, and we've done all the investigation that's required in flow monitoring, and we're going to continue to flow monitor, but we are starting to line next month and into the spring. Now we're starting to shift our focus onto laterals as well, because laterals are a culprit on not only the city side but also the private side. We have done investigations on the private side where there's multiple routes and actually breaching into the pipes, and it's very clear that the laterals do contribute a lot to the infiltration on the system.
Councillor?
Just to follow up then on the financial side, if the financial aid package that we're offering hasn't created an uptake, where do we have to move to get people interested in doing it?
Anybody want to answer that?
Through the mayor, I can help Steve out because I think he doesn't want to answer it. So we've had a lot of conversation internally, and right now we have a very modest recommendation for the grant program. We will be, when we come back and talk about the INS, I think you'll see in some of the heat maps of areas where the laterals are very concerning. Our director and our manager of infrastructure were able to show me one where when it rains, I'm going to get this wrong, I apologize, just correct me if I'm right, 83,000 liters of water go through that lateral. Did I get that number right? 83 M3 you said, so is that 83,000 liters in a day?
Probably liters.
Milliliter.
Liters.
Liters.
There's a lot of, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm right, 83,000 liters. So you can imagine that, like one lateral could be responsible for 83,000 liters of I&I during a rainstorm, and the rainstorm will see it go up and then down over the next 4 or 5 days. So that's one lateral at one house. So they've heat mapped some of this to identify some additional work would be required. But the problem is, to a house, a lateral, if everything's still coming out of the house, it's fine. There might be no incentive, no amount of money is going to, unless it's all. And I think that's what we're going to have a conversation as we look at these heat maps and talk. This is a very modest adjustment that we're suggesting, more on risk management than on anything else to make sure you get the complete. But we may be looking at a program in some cases, which I think Mayor Steele has even said in previous years, that in some really bad areas, we might need to go all the way to the house, and it's the only way to stop the I&I. And we might have to have a serious look at that and the cost. And I understand it's somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 to reline one of these, so you can see it would add up for if you did multiple properties.
Councillor?
So I'll take the heat off of Steve, because I know he doesn't want to discuss the dollars. That'll be for council to decide what the incentive will be. You may suggest, but it'll be council that makes that decision. One other quick question with regards to capital project funding for water dollars. Capital funding in 23 was 13.5%. Capital project funding in 24 is forecasted for 21.3. So for the thousands of people that are watching online right now, what can they expect to see being done in the next year or so to support that increase? Because everybody will want to know, you're taking more of my money. What are you doing with it? Where are you spending it? Where's the projects that I can see taking place out my window?
That's coming up, Brian, in another slide.
Yeah, through the mayor to council, we will talk about it, and actually I think we have a supplementary slides that we have as well that talk about some of the specific streets that they're working on. But part of this year's increase is really because the DMAFRA grant, remember, was not just about storm sewers. There was also some water projects, and I think council told us if you do have to rip up a street, specifically in this downtown area, you need to be able to be prepared to replace the water at the same time. You do not want that street ripped up twice. So there's a couple million in that program. So the maps are available because we presented the report before. I don't know if Steve can speak more to it as we go through tonight, but alternatively, also as we go through the INS presentations in the next month, you'll get to see some of that at even a more granular level. But a lot of it's because it's part of, we have to come up with our funding for the 32 million, and some of those streets were in the downtown right here.
Okay, thanks. Just because people may hear that increase right now and wonder why you've increased it so much and want to know the why and wherefores behind it. So stick around and watch the rest of the meeting.
Councillor Bruno.
Worship. Brian, the previous slide, or two previous, it talked about, yes, that one, sorry, the growth one. So what is the purpose of that?
Through the mayor to the council, it's a great question, and for me, it's to make sure that, and maybe I should have spent more time on it. To me, it's to make sure people understand the importance of growth to the city. Because we have the development charges that are coming in to make sure growth pays for growth, so the new pipes will get paid, but each of those individuals that come in will also be a contributor to the system. And every contributor we have to the system will help share the total fixed costs of our system across the system, specifically on wastewater, where one house doesn't necessarily create the majority of what's going to the waste treatment plant. The house isn't. It's where the I&I, it's the older pipes. So every individual, every unit you add into the city is another individual that's going to help potentially lower the cost. And when I say lower, it might mean, as Councillor Bruno noted, our starting point with a regional increase might be 5% a year that we might be working on. But if you have some new ratepayers, that could maybe lower that to 4%, depending on how many ratepayers you have. So growth does have the opportunity to help us spread our fixed costs over more, which can help make things in the long run more affordable for all of our residents.
Councillor?
Right, but substantially, you'd have to start building the house tomorrow to have an effect on 2024 rates by the time they moved in and all that. And at our growth numbers, it is relevant, and it does drive home the point that you said, that we need growth to help augment these increases. But really for 2024, there's not really going to be much relevance there out of those numbers. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councilor, that's correct. And that's where my illustrative was talking about a 10-year. Decisions that are made now, i.e. the capital budget being almost nothing in 2020, and councils 3 years ago to start it, and this council to continue to invest, to continue to put money into infrastructure, it has raised the price. Now we're at a spot to do the fix, and now that fix is going to take a couple years to build out, and then you're going to start to see the benefit. But the time lag here, not just on growth, but even on construction, it's going to be a couple years. There will be what we do today, we may not see the benefit till 2025 or 2026. And that's where delaying infrastructure work is probably not an option at this point in time.
Just off of Councillor Elliott's point, just want to make sure procedurally I'm right here. It's the same question, just in a different way. Steve, the infiltration that's now laterals that Councillor Elliott spoke about and that you've been working on. So my understanding when we talked about the $10 million and the lining project for this year, that 31 kilometers or 1/3 of the system, at that time though we were talking mains, right? I see Joe nodding it. So I guess where I'm going is we have the money there allocated. So could this mean that more could be allocated to lining laterals under that same budgetary amount, which might mean lowering the number of mains, but it's really about the return on investment. So we may not be relining a third of the city, but we might be relining 20%, and the rest is all those laterals, because I mean, those laterals add up pretty fast against the length of a main, notwithstanding they're not the same size. And just if I could, I know this will come later, since we're on that, do you know, we talked about December 8th, like a trial, but when do you think you'd be in a position to tender that contract or start any of the, I guess, the guts of the real work?
Mr. Shafowski?
Yeah, through you, your worship. Just to touch base on the laterals first, so we, that is a great idea to start paying some of the laterals out of that $10 million that was previously approved to. What we've done today is we've created some, as Mr. Bowles, Director Bowles said, we have some heat maps of different locations that show high amounts of infiltration within the system. That is where we're going to be directing a lot of the sources of the funding to. That's also where we're going to be doing a lot of cammering of the laterals before we actually determine exactly what's needed on each lateral. Every lateral may not need to be lined, so that's where we want to be a little bit strategic and not just do every lateral, but actually do the ones that need to be done. In terms of the $10 million for the sanitary laterals,
Laterals or mains?
Mains, sorry.
Yeah, I can jump in if you'd like. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So currently, right now, we have the lining program already started. Contractors have gone in and video cameraed main lines that are in our high priority areas through the flow monitoring. We're gonna, like Steve said, we're gonna further that investigation where we really narrow down areas, and there's a contract being put together right now as we speak. We're looking at early January, February of 2024 to put that out to tender, and that's going to be for approximately $3 million worth of work, and that's going to really be focused on our high priority areas based on the information that we've received and studied over the last 6 months.
So when would that?
Microphone? Microphone?
When would it start, likely, if you tendered in January?
So just to be clear, the lining is already started. We're going to complete that over the next 3 to 4 months. The $3 million lining
Yes.
program should commence in the spring.
Okay.
We'll have a tender ready to go out early 2024, and we'd like to get a contractor on board. It's going to be a very large project, so lateral lining will be included in that as well as a provisional item, based on our information, and we would like to get started in the spring of 2024.
So I just want to close the loop on that. So that was when it would start, but when would it finish? Because finish is when it starts paying dividends.
So, again, it's a very, very large contract, and there's probably very few contractors that would be prepared to do that much lining in a short period of time. We feel that we should be able to get it done in 2024. We're hoping to get the first phase of the project. We're looking at a 3-year project, and the first phase would be about $3 million, and we feel that we can get it completed by December of 2024. That's the goal.
If I could just lastly, what would it take to rev that up more than one contractor? Are the people out there, if on their order book now,
Right.
jammed?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the plan right now, we've gone through and identified the high priority areas, and we feel that we can complete the first set of high priority. We have pipes selected, ready to go right now in 2024. In the spring of 2024, we're continually doing further I shouldn't say the word investigation, but further flow monitoring that will further identify other areas that are high priority, which may turn into lateral lining, and it could, if the contractor is able to do more, and we have pipes identified, which we feel that we will in the spring, we're going to continue that right through.
Great, thank you. Steve, with regards to the laterals, obviously there are going to be those that can't be relined. They could be old clay tile or whatever it may be. Are those the ones we're going to push towards our program, or are we going to go in and change those out?
Yeah, to you, your worship. So we would come up with a program, whether it's lining or replacement. no matter what it needs to be done, if it can't be relined, we would have to do full excavation on there, and that's what we would also be looking to do at the same time. It's remediation of the system as a whole.
But with regards to that, so if it's on a homeowner's property, would we push them to our financial program that we have to help offset the cost of that, or are we gonna take over the whole cost of it?
So we will be coming back to council to talk about potentially taking over the cost of doing it, going on to private property. As we start talking about infiltration and trying to resolve the issues on the city's side, we can't really solve all of the issues until we address the private side as well too. So it will be in our interest to start talking about actually accessing private property. Once we have a little bit of a feel on the cammering of the laterals in those high density zones, we'll be coming back to council with some recommendations to let you know what the possibilities are, what the cost would be, and then what the potential to recoup some costs are on that too, or the long-term return on investment for that program as a whole. But we need a little more information to be able to justify doing that. More than likely, I would assume that's the way we're going to make the recommendation though.
Thank you. Further questions? Councilor Paglia?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just question, we're still doing investigations and all the other stuff. We applied for a debenture. When will we know better that we have to apply for more of a debenture or not? Like, are we getting a big enough loan to cover all this work, or should council be looking at doing the finances more now and then wait until next December and say, hey, we might need another $10 million. What do you think, council?
Brian?
Through the mayor to the councillor, as we go through the process, I think you're going to see an iterative step where there will be new projects put forward and new debt required. But just to be clear, one thing that I'm very thankful to our Public Works Department is they do understand the concept of ROI, and it's one of the reasons why they broke the project up into 3 components. So the reason why in 2024 they're looking at about 3 or maybe stretch it if they can, get that done, because they're going to do the high heat map areas, and they'll be able to see, because they have flow monitors throughout the city now, right? So they can actually see the impact that's happening. So while council's approved for 10 million to be issued, just to be clear, to get to your question, like, staff will not issue the debt until we come back to council, but we would only come back to council to issue the 3 million that he's doing, and then we'll come back to council as more work comes up, and we'll issue it in tranches. We're not, while council's approved 10 million in debt, we are, and it's actually my next slide to go over, we're not going out and issuing 10 million of debt until the work is done, kind of thing.
Councilor? Okay. Councilor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. Just to that point. So we've got this high-profile project that's we believe is going to work. It's going to take 3 years to expend potentially the $10 million. The benefits are trailing by a year, because by the time you get it in, then the next year is when you really reap the benefit of it. So on the rest of the problems in the system, shouldn't debt be issued or lined up so that we're doing some things concurrently? Because my worry is that we're just going from 3 million to 3 million to 3 million, and other things are happening on the water and storm sewer side. Are there going to be things that are happening concurrently there? So, there's $6 million being spent every year, 3 on this, 3, and a mirrored amount of money for something else, so we're attacking this at more than one level.
Mr. Bowles?
Through the mayor to the councillor and council, 100%, and that's where, when the INS gets presented, council will be able to see the next stages where the key water projects are going to come forward, and where, for example, the lateral discussions are going to happen at a significant pace, because those lateral discussions you're probably going to break it up into 2 components. The red areas council will probably say, if I was to guess, and our staff's recommendation will be, you're going to have to just do them. We're going to have to do them. But in other areas where there's low risk, we'll have a grant program that people can choose to do them if they want to do going forward. So there'll be a lot of opportunities. And I think we've talked many times, it's been in many of my reports, and I learned very early in my career that in the municipal world, every day is budget day. And just because we're setting the budget today, remember what we're doing, and I get up here and it's not Steve up here, I'm up here because we're trying to establish a funding framework, a funding target to be able to put money aside for projects. And this project, and I'll get to it in 2 slides, is putting money into the reserves. It's putting money into the reserves so we can do the DMAF grant, but it also gives council the flexibility, as soon as that INS comes back, that council can say, you know what, I want to get going on my 25 budget and 26 because I want that plan to be done now so I can let it early. So all those conversations are going to be able to proceed. So I do have confidence that with the work that Public Works is doing, that they'll be able to show council where the next investments are. And this budget gives you the flexibility to be able to move forward with those next investments.
Councillor?
Just to round that out, I guess I'm still worried that we've identified this, we're going forward, I understand the rollout, but I don't understand what the next parallel project is, because if that hasn't been identified, and maybe it's the study that does it, that again, all these things are lagging. If you identify what the next $10 million spend is, that's 6 or 8 months this year, and then you identify it, then that has to be tendered and phased, then it doesn't start till the following year. Like, I get every day is budget day, but for me, every day is leak day. And unless you can run parallel programs, like I don't see the one for storm sewer. And so, you know, we talked about taking 2 people out of the team. Do we need more resources to speed up Plan 2, Fix 2 that's not lining, and the same thing and the same thing? So that takes resources, somebody to plan it, somebody to tender the contract, and you know, I think we're just trying, it seems like we're trying to do that. Like, this is a big bite, this lining program. There should be 2 other programs going on, and that's not for tonight, but are we going to see that? And when are we going to see that? Because I think we have to walk and chew gum at the same time here.
Mr. Shapowski?
Yep, through your worship. So we're kind of, we're walking and chewing that gum now. What we're doing is we are going towards, or we are working on investigating the system and knowing what's happening, flow monitoring, getting the information out there, but we're also running with projects at the same time. We're doing the lining program. 2024 or 2023 was really the pivotal time of gathering information and knowing what's happening in the system so that we can direct our resources a little bit better. 24 is the year of action. 24 is the year where we're going to start doing the lining programs. We're starting to tackle the laterals and add that into the mix as well. And the storm system's also coming online. So right now we're doing the investigation on the storm system as a whole to document what's happening, to get a model built, to see where our issues are during 2 and 5 year storms. And then from there, we start shifting into the storm actual construction after that too, which probably won't happen until about 25 or so. But we're kind of merging all of these avenues into the same funnel. So I think that's what you're trying to say too, is like we're running with all water, wastewater, storm, all at the same time. So not one is being left behind, but we're taking a systematic approach to make sure that we have some information to make good decisions in the future on each aspect of it.
Steve, can we see that laid out at some future meeting where these parallel things are going, so that we actually have dates and milestones and how much money is needed? And if you need help to make those things happen, that has to be part of the solution. Because I don't think we sometimes need to have 80 or 90% of the job done before a shovel goes in the ground. And, you know, maybe there's some ways to speed up even the 5-year program. Because, you know, at the rates that the treatment rates that are going up that fast, I mean, you could afford some people to give you on a contractual basis to reduce these lead times and actually hit the ground. And I'm worried that we're doing all the right things, but the rates are moving faster than we fix it. And the age of everything's aging out faster than we can fix them. And we need to do something to ramp this forward faster than it is. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Your Worship. Just a response to that, we're currently working on a program or a visualization of what we're doing right now. So if council's okay with it, maybe we'll bring that back and we'll tie it into the infrastructure needs study presentation at the same time, so you can see what we found out and where it's taking us in the future.
Do you know when that might be?
We're hoping for December, but that's a conversation we're having with the clerk right now, just to make sure we can find a mutually agreeable date.
Early first quarter, probably.
I'm hoping December.
Probably early first quarter, but that's fine. Councillor Baggy.
That was my question when the infrastructure needs assessment report's coming back, but you also have it here, a nonlinear asset management plan. Is that coming with the same report?
Through you, Your Worship. So that one is a separate one that's currently being worked on right now. The timeline for that one is about June or July of 2024. So that'll be a presentation probably May-ish, but yep, May 2024.
This may be a dumb question, but what is a nonlinear asset management plan? Sorry.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. So it's it's the next step of our asset management plan. It is a requirement for us to have that. It's picking up different entities that aren't our water, wastewater, storm infrastructure, road networks. It's going to concentrate on things like trees or assets, some smaller facilities that we have. So it kind of rounds out what the overall assets that the municipality owns has. So that'll be supplemental information to what we have already in our current asset management plans.
Go ahead, Councillor.
I'm good, Mr. Mayor.
Perfect. Further questions at this level? Brian, go ahead.
Okay, our next slide just talks about our current debt position, and actually, based on some of the conversations and questions that were asked, it's an interesting slide to look at, because you can see right now, debt's coming down, but council has approved $12.4 million for the DMAF grant, which is $32 million dollars in total, and the wastewater lining project, which would be $10 million, which would bring our total debt up to 34. And I know we had previous slides in a couple budgets ago that I showed that I think if you go back to around 2015 or something, 2013, all the way up until now, like council's big project was Nickel Storm Sewer, and the number of dollars otherwise invested, just because there wasn't a lot of money in the capital program, but you as council have moved forward with more capital projects in the last 2 years approving than councils had basically in the last, I don't know, 10 years. And it's because you've moved forward with a funding model to be able to fund some of these projects and to be able to support some of the research to know where these projects have to happen. So from staff's perspective, we appreciate the support to move forward on these projects. On the reserve side, and I think this is really important for council to understand the flexibility you have as we go forward with the INS. We didn't put every dollar into a capital project in this budget because we knew the INS was going to be coming forward, and we knew we have to fund the DMAFRA grant. So these are the reserves right now going into 2024 that we're forecasting. And we're forecasting there's about $5 million between storm, wastewater, and water reserves to be able to move forward with some of the projects. So as Steve and the group, as a Director of Public Works and the group, bring forward the INS projects, whether it be the lateral projects or whether it be specific projects to move forward in addition on the water side, council does have the flexibility to move those forward. And despite multiple times of reviewing, you'll notice that the 78 doesn't jive with the earlier numbers I said. It's actually 22. It was the inverse of the number. So if you look at water, it's actually 22% of the required funding level. We are not at 78% of the required funding level, we're at 22%. So despite the amount of money that we're investing in infrastructure right now, we are still significantly below the level to which the engineer professionals tell us we're going to need to get to in the coming years. And this next slide depicts it. a little bit more granularly for storm, wastewater, and water, you can see the budget levels we have. And you can see when you add them up, we have about 3.5 million, which is incredible because the last 4 council budgets have moved that from almost 0 to 3.5 million to actually get work done. So councils are making a huge impact on getting these shovels in the ground. And then I just want to talk a little bit, and maybe the Director of Public Works can help me out, or the Director of Infrastructure on this slide. I appreciate the Manager of Communications that helped us make it look a little less boring, because you saw my chart from last year. But we've tried to highlight some of the operating in-year activities, so you can see everything from complaints to hydro inspections to water flows. Now, what's very important for me to make sure you understand is 2022 numbers is the whole year. And 2023 numbers only goes to the end of October. So it's not quite apples to apples because there's still 2 months left in 2023, but it is kind of impressive to see some of the areas where we've already, the maintenance hole inspections are significantly. So that's because they were going through a process to document all the maintenance holes, conditions and that. So we were able to go through over 2,000 were able to be checked out, which will inform the INS, which Public Works is going to talk to you about to give you more detail about where that work is going to go. So for the first time, this council is going to have science to actually help dictate, I think, where, not the first time, but in a while, you'll have that real science to be able to help determine where those next capital investments occur. And then we do have a couple slides because everybody always asks where our water purchases versus our water billing is. So you can see here, the red line is how much water we purchase from the Niagara region, and then the blue line is how much we actually meter or bill out. And we have decreased over the last year. One of the key areas we do believe, based on work that was done, was new developments. We are working on a new, Public Works is working on a new bylaw. I think the bylaw hasn't been updated since 1995 or 97 on when we put water meters on locations. And that new bylaw is going to address being able to meter new developments as they go forward. We also, council approved in June 27th, 2023 this year, some adjustments to how we're doing fixed charges. And those fixed charges will impact how we get to bill for developments going forward. So we at least will be able to recoup some of the funds with respect to that water loss going forward. On the next slide, a little granular, but I always like to point out, and I pointed out in the last couple of years, that Port Colborne has about 4.1% of the population in the Niagara region. And that little line in the bottom right-hand corner, if you can see it, says we pay about 4.5% of the total water bill of the Niagara region. And that is because our water loss numbers are there. The next one talks about wastewater treatment volumes versus basically precipitation and the rain areas. You can see the treated volume linearly is going down, but you can kind of envision that chart. Once you drop off 2019 and bring in 2024, that line might not be as positive because we've just had a big spike in this last year. But also we've seen precipitation increase a little bit over this last year, as well as lake levels, waste treatment versus our lake levels. And there is more detailed information on all of these, like the actual numbers, if you go to Appendix D in your budget report. The actual figures, it's not just graphically shown. And this one is the one that I always find, most troubling, and I think you've heard me speak about our wastewater charges. Our wastewater volume is particularly, I think, the area that we have to focus on. When you look at this, we're 4.1% of the population. The bottom right, we pay for 6.1% of the total region's wastewater system when we go forward. So that is something that I think, and that's where when we've had these conversations of when are we relining pipes, when do we reline the pipes going into a house, the lateral lines. This is, I think, where the area is, and this is the area that I know council has a lot of questions. And I mentioned this earlier. You could use meters cubed or you could do liters, but for every 1 liter that we sell in water, we send 2.7 liters back to the region's water treatment plant. And that's where the bulk of our of our costs are. I can stop there, and if there's any questions, or I can just keep going. Good. So there is a couple, we have a couple of pictures, and I won't spend a lot of time on them, but you can see the team at work in a variety of areas across the city, whether it be inspecting the manholes, flushing, digging lines for pipes. A project that did get done this year was all the hydrants were inspected and then and definitely repainted. And just anyways, just a couple of pictures just to show work is happening across the city, whether it be investigative or whether it be replacement. And this is just a sneak peek. It's not of the INS study that's coming through, but we do have it broken out in ranges, water meters, water breaks. You can drill it down to different locations, useful life. So we'll be able to, and council can even book a meeting, I'm sure, with Public Works to have a more detailed review of any of these maps and how it's being built. So this is the fundamental bedrock to be able to make our future investment decisions to get the biggest bang for our buck with respect to investing. Next couples, I guess I'm going to my next, some of the budget detail. I don't know if there's any questions before I get into budget detail. Good. So this has been brought up a couple times, the lateral program. So right now, the current lateral program is a $1,000 grant for water and a $1,000 grant for wastewater, and you get $2,500 loan for water and wastewater. Now, Councillor Begg, you asked me how many people wanted to participate in this program. We had 7 on water, 8 for wastewater, and nobody wanted the loan. Everybody wanted the grant. Everybody was able to find their own financing going forward. One of the things that we've talked to some different municipalities, we've also talked to legal, because of still, even though it's a loan and even though there's a signature to say if you do the loan, we could put it on your taxes, there is a question of that, and because of that, because of the collectability concerns that some of our legal team has brought up, the interest charges and the fact that we haven't had anybody interested in that, everybody's been interested in the grant, we do recommend that we just don't continue with the loan program on a go-forward basis. But we look at improving the grant for now as a placeholder. We do believe that we keep the $1,000 grant, but if you do both of them, you would get $3,000. And that's what we would like council to let us move forward with the grant program. And we can continue to evolve this grant as we have the detailed conversation that Public Works will bring us through with the INS with respect to laterals. And I don't know if that's a very specific adjustment. I don't know if council has any thoughts on this.
Councillor Borgard.
Through your worship to Director Bowles, I guess earlier in the presentation, I'm getting a little bit confused as to what the program really is. So I think earlier there was this mention of, instead of lateral replacement, it was putting lining in the laterals. So this one's saying replacement, so I'm just wondering, what is it?
So through the mayor to the councilor and council, so when we're doing it, our original thought process would be for most laterals, we would try to reline them because it's cheaper to reline them. And I think that's a bit of where the confusion happens. And I think the mayor also asked, well, but some are going to be clay, so you're just going to have to do a complete replacement, and that's true. In this program, the way it's developed right now, and the Director of Public Works can correct me, but we've done it as a lateral replacement program. So if you're going to replace your lateral, I know it gets run out of the water department on who gets signed off on, but if I'm wrong on that, Director, please just correct me. But I believe it's a full replacement. That's how the program works right now.
I guess going on, because if it's water, if it was going to be relining, then it would be significantly cheaper, like the whole process, which may be more advantageous for the individuals with the lateral issues. But if we're replacing a lateral, I believe there's extensive costs that go into it. Like, does any of staff know what the average or a typical cost to replace a lateral would be for a resident?
Steve?
Through your resident, it could be up to $5,000 to $10,000 to do a full replacement, or it could be about $3,000 to $5,000 for a lateral replacement. Some of the costs have driven for the liners is for mobilization, demobilization costs, for mostly to get out to site for that. But personally, I wouldn't be opposed to lining being an option for this grant program.
Okay. For the lateral replacement, do we do the replacement, or does the resident hire a contractor to do it?
Through your worship, so the resident would hire a contractor, and then we would go out and we would investigate to make sure that the work was completed before issuing the grant.
So just to clarify one of his questions, once they decide they're going to replace, or we'll call it a repair, which is what lining is, that's when we would go in camera and say, yes, this is okay to do that. We would help the homeowner along with that decision, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just to clarify your question. Councillor Baggy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have my lateral line changed this past summer, and 24 feet cost me $3,500. So that's about the cost. It was $2,500, but the price went up to $3,500. So there is a cost, Mr. Mayor, and only because I was changing my front porch, the water line went underneath the front porch. I might as well change my lateral line. And I can't see them putting a liner in that. It's already like a 3/4 inch or 1 inch pipe, old galvanized pipe from the city. Like you have to change a pipe because they are corroded. Mine was
Water
corroded.
side, yes.
Yeah, mine was
Sewer
corroded.
side, the lining is on the sewer side.
Yeah, okay.
And my cost in around 2019 or 2020 was the same for my water line, was $3,500. And I went from 1/2 inch to 3/4 too, so. Councilor Bruno?
It's interesting what Councilor Beauregard brought up. If you just went to research right now, Googled wastewater line relining, the first thing that pops up is residential, because obviously, municipalities aren't looking up things as much as the homeowner is. And so it's interesting to me that there could be potentially a lot of work get done with the homeowner involvement, and that closes our gap even faster. So like $1,000, on a reline included, maybe gets more relines done, and we don't really care whether it's replacement or reline. In both cases, it's saving us money, so why not do it? So I would put that forward that we should. The question I had about reline is, so we're all now about inventory of lines and conditions. So, if you watch the building permit reports for the last 15 years, there's always 2 or 3 each month that's a water line replacement, Enberg, whatever. Same thing with wastewater. Do we collect that data? So if we're looking at, Homewood, we really don't have to look at Joe Smith's line if the building permit records inventory into the wastewater and water records. And so now we know that there's 12 houses on that street, but 4 have been done in the last 10 years. We don't have to test that. So is the system, it's probably not set up that we know that from years past out of building permits? Because that's before predating these programs.
Steve?
Through your worship, so as of this time, that is what we do. We have a program called Citywide that the city as a whole uses. The building permits do go in there. We are able to access them just through typing in an address. So that is some of the information that we look at when we're doing our investigation on before we actually commit to doing construction on a job to see what we're up against. So at this time right now, we are doing that. Paper documents, or the way it was done in the past, isn't preloaded into the system, so that's the only downfall to it. But if that information is available, we always seek out as much as possible to make the right decisions before we can before we progress forward. In a worst case scenario, if we don't have it, we do camera the laterals just to be on the safe side so we know what we're up against before we start construction.
Is there any possibility to look at this if, when we did Erie Street, we told every resident on the street, this is for water, that we're gonna be there doing the main and doing the lateral to the curb stop. And 3 or 4 of them said, you know what, if you're gonna do your part, now's a great time for me to do my part. And a few people picked up on it. What's interesting to me is, do we do it in, should we be having a pot of money to do it in reverse? So Joe Smith calls up, he's gonna do his lateral. Is that the time we marry up with doing the lateral? Maybe either with his contractor or one that we have. Because I think they'd sure appreciate that they're lining their sewer or putting a new water line in on their side. If we were doing it on our side, if it was possible, I know you got to get into the street, the sidewalk, and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, then that's a completed string. And the likelihood, I would think, is, you know, if these lines are lasting 40, 50, 60 years, when the homeowner's line went, ours is probably just as old. The subdivision went in, we put our bid in, the homeowner built his house and put his in. And back then, there probably wasn't too much spacing between when our side went in and their side went in. So, I mean, that's a whole lot of goodwill that we're gonna now fix our end, and we get a complete one done. I mean, it's a lot of stops and starts unless you use the contractor they're using, but, you know, every little bit helps. And if they're doing their part, I don't know, I'd say the same thing. The chances of ours starting to leak, if it's the same age as their half of the laterals, probably not far behind.
Steve?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. So I do recall, it hasn't happened often, but once or twice since I've been here, there has been those opportunities where someone's come forward with issues on their laterals, and after we've done some cameraing on them, we have determined that our lateral isn't in great condition either, and we have agreed to share the cost to actually replace those laterals. It's the right thing to do at the time, especially if we need the laterals replaced. I think as we move forward, we've got to start looking at a much grander scale. Instead of 1 or 2, we might be looking at hundreds of them at a time, right? I think putting certain incentives out there, especially in the high flagged areas or the red areas that we have, might be something that we can look to alter this grant program as well to make sure there's a higher incentive for people to take part. And on the other side, we were mentioning previously that it might just be the city of Port Colborne that needs to make the decision to go in on those private properties and replace those laterals.
Yeah, maybe it's a matching fund. You do yours, we'll do ours.
Yeah.
Okay, look at it, thanks.
Further questions? Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks. So just as we leave this slide, just to reiterate, in case because I don't think I explained this perfectly when I started this slide, part of the change in proposal is to do exactly what I think Councillor Bruno mentioned, so I'm thinking that I wasn't clear when he mentioned it. Our goal would be that we would change it to replacement or lining. It's not just replacement, where in the past it was replacement, and now it's replacement or lining. So that $1,000 can go a lot further. Without us having to put more money in, they can go a lot further. I think Councillor Beauregard was saying the same thing. So just to be clear, staff is trying to go right with that.
So just before you move on, council, only because it is proposed, just consensus, do you guys want to see him move to the new granting system? Councilors here, is that, as opposed to just the 1,000 each, it's the 1,000 for each and then 3,000 if you do them both at the same time, but it also includes the lining. Does that sound better to you guys too? Yeah. Same with you guys? There you go, Brian.
Perfect. My next couple of slides is just, we looked at it in totality. This is a long history of going back to 2020. It's too bad the 2019, because it was in 2020 that we really started to build up the capital fund to get onto the construction work. But the majority of the increase you can see in the increase column is either the Niagara Region budget or it's the capital budget that is going up in this area. In this case, you can see the transfer line under the variance is about $600,000. That's all related to capital. That's us putting the dollars aside so we can do the DMAFRA grant. And then as Steve brings forward the INS, you as council can make decisions on your next projects going forward. Wastewater, it's the exact same story, except the magnitude is much more significant. The Niagara Regional payment for wastewater is going up $876,000, about 17.8%. We're using this year's water, our wastewater volumes, taking and timesing it by their rate. I know council often asks me, don't we have a 3-year averaging? We do, but there's always a end of the year reallocation or adjustment back to actual. So the budget's based on 3 years, but then we adjust at the end of the year back to actual. So I unfortunately can't just use the budget based on the 3-year average. I have to forecast what our actual might be. So we're basing actual based on this year's performance, and that's why it's going up. And then on storm water, the same story, except without the region, because we don't pay the region for storm water, but as been mentioned by all councillors here, is if we don't fix the stormwater, we don't remove the water from the system, so we don't have a place for the I&I to go. And so this is all about the capital transfer. And then just when I talk about looking forward, we brought these when we brought forward the DMAF grant. Stage 1 for specifically for wastewater, when we're looking forward, was areas 6, 7, and 13. And then stage 2 will be 2, 3, and 22. And it's all dependent on the infrastructure study, which I think we've talked about many times. Public Works wants to present it in December if we can find a date for council to be able to do that. And then stage 3 will move on depending on our success in stage 1 and 2. And then looking forward, we have a couple additional areas that we're working on. We are working with the INS, and you kind of saw some of that. We're starting to build KPIs for the system, complete the INS. Council's already approved a project to enhance the GIS system so we can enhance the mapping and the granular level on that. We are working right now on the development charges, which we hope to have done for the spring, so that way growth pays for growth and it doesn't put any more pressure on the current system. And then we are working on a multi-year forecast, which will come after the conversations with council about the INS. So that way council will be able to see how projects will stack up over multiple years. And then I have 2 areas just before we kind of wrap up the presentation, just to talk about some billing changes. And it is kind of interesting because I attached it to the one presentation, but it kind of relates to both reports, because you have a budget and then you have to figure out how you bill the budget. We have found from an administrative perspective, we do have a couple properties that get a storm sewer bill, but they don't get a tax bill, i.e. a church, i.e. the Legion. And it is kind of weird for them, for us to send them a tax bill when they don't get a tax bill. And our recommendation with council is for approval to be able to take their payment, divide it by 12, and put it on their water wastewater bill, since they're not used to getting a tax bill. It's kind of a confusing thing to get a tax bill when you never get a tax bill. And that really is, I guess, the whole story on that slide. We just think from an administrative perspective, if you don't normally get a tax bill, it would be easier just to put it on the water wastewater bill going forward. And then the other item with respect to the billing change is really with respect to, if you remember back in June, we approved some changes to the fixed fees in multi-residential units. And when we did that, we did it on the wastewater side and the water side. And it was brought forward that because we went to that model and we said, you know what, we can now calculate it, how many units per multi-residential unit. We should also marry up the same billing model on the storm sewer side. And council that will remember some councils remember, some councils are new. A couple council budgets ago, and I think it was before this term, we went to a grouping on storm sewers. So we said all the multi-residentials with 2 to 5 units, we're going to put in a group. And all the individuals that are in 6 to 10 units, we're going to put in a group. And all the units that are 10 and above, we're going to put in a group. And it was really because we had limitations on the system to be able to track it by a precise, like how many in each building. But now we've grown the systems ability and we can actually track how many are in each building, and we're building it that way for water and wastewater. Our recommendation is we should charge based on actual number of units in the stormwater. Now in the report we identify that for everybody that has less than 20 units, it actually will reduce multi-residential charges to those with less than 20. But it will slightly increase those if you have more than 20, because we're billing based on actual units. And as a reminder, it's because in each of those categories, we always build at the maximum. So if you're in the category of 2 to 5 and you have 3 units, there was a motion by council to build them at 5 at the max, because we couldn't decipher where they were. We only knew from the tax code that they were in that unit. But now that we've gone through the audit to know how many units are in each category, we don't need to worry about the categories anymore, because we can put every single multi-residential building as their own code with their own units, and we can take the storm sewer fee times the number of units. And I know that was a lot, but it actually is quite simple. We used to have 3 categories, and what we are recommending we do going forward is just take the number of units times the storm sewer fee. And for everybody with less than 20 units, it will mean a slight reduction, and above it'll mean a slight increase. But by and large, it's the totality. It's not a change. I don't know if there's any questions on those two. This one, there might have been. Maybe I should have had an extra slide to help explain it. As I was explaining it, I realized I probably made it sound more complicated than it is.
So Brian, where you say proposed, where you've got fixed charge on 3 units or more, and then fixed charge times number of units.
Yeah.
So am I reading this correctly, that if you're a 1 or 2 unit building, house, it's the same charge?
Yeah, you
So
be charged.
so where those, on the current system, if you were 2 units, you paid more than a 1 unit, but now you're saying, as long as you're 3 and above, the 1 and 2 units are all paying the same?
That's correct, through the mayor to council. And the reason why we're recommending that is because we made the conversation when we were doing these fixed charges in June adjustments for water, wastewater. There was this concept of intensification. There was this concept of being able to share a second unit within a house, affordability. There was housing option discussions. So that's why we left it at the 3. And that's where we think by moving this, we would start it at 3 in this scenario too. So happy to take any other questions and discuss the budget further, but I should say thank you, and thank you to staff that's here tonight, and I know we're still available to answer any questions you may have with respect to the budget.
Great, thanks Brian, and on behalf of council, great presentation. So council, I'm going to put this on the floor because then you can ask questions and make comments. So I'll do that first, and then allow comments to be made, so as opposed to just questions. So the recommendation is that the committee of the whole recommend to council the Corporate Services Department Report 2023-164 be received, and that the 2024 rates budget as outlined in Appendix B to Corporate Services Department Report 2023-164 be approved. If I could have Councillors Bodner and Hoyle move that to get it on the floor. Councillor Beauregard.
And through your worship to Director Bowles, just because you were talking about at the moment when I was with the billing, I think in the past we sent infographics with the water bill at one point in time, correct? Is that still continuing, or will that continue?
So through the mayor to the councillor, yes, that will still continue. And it goes in the February bill, because the February bill is actually the January bill. So staff have about, assuming this we approve, staff have a couple weeks to put it together. And I think last year we shared it with council in advance in case there was anything else council thought we should include, and we'll do the same this year.
Okay. And do we send that infographic to people who pay online, that are part of the online payment method?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councilor and council, we will be able to share it with people with the online mechanism as well.
So I got one other question, which is kind of a big question, I think, and I'm not sure how you're going to be able to answer it, but ultimately, every resident, we as a council have faced this issue multiple times, just in regards to how much it costs. Water's always going up. It's a big issue amongst our residents. When can we expect to see less of an increase in the bills? Like when can, like right now we're dropping to 14%. I think previous years has been 10%. I don't know exactly, but they always seem to be large increases. And when it comes down to it, the residents are just going to see this increase and say it's costing us more, and it's getting worse in terms of how much the cost is, even though we know what's going on, how we're trying to fix it. But is there any time frame that residents can expect to see some type of relief financially?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councillor, I think realistically, given, and we'll take the Niagara Region's lead, they've done their studies and they have a 10-year program, and I think water's somewhere around 5 and wastewater somewhere around 10% annually. So it's hard to answer because you're going up against that increase at a minimum on how we're going. And if we don't invest in infrastructure, and I think that's where that graph that I showed where it's going up, and we're going to have to invest extra now to try to improve the infrastructure to stop, or at least only go up by no more than what they're going up in that model. So that time horizon is something we're going to have to monitor. And it's going to be about the aggressiveness, as some of the councillors have said, to which we can get projects in the ground to repair some of the I&I. And the faster we can do that, I think the faster maybe I can give you a better answer. I can't give you a date, but investing in infrastructure will have an impact. It will have a significant impact because you can see the data, and just in the slide alone, we pay for 6.1% of the total region system. Our population's only 4.1%, and I know about not quite, but let's just say a third of our population isn't even on water, which means we might have 3% of our population paying for water, but we're paying for 6% of the Niagara Region system. So every dollar in infrastructure will help reduce those charges.
Just one other thing on that. If we were, could you maybe show us a figure of what it would look like if, say, we hit our goals and how much wastewater is going to the region that is part of the infiltration and inflow, the I&I. If we were to hit the targets that we want and we're trying to do through all these studies with the current rates and fees that we currently pay, to see what that kind of bill would look like for a resident. Just to see, because I think that you can kind of get a better understanding of what, like I guess it just becomes more realistic, or more you become familiar with it, or just it becomes visual. It's just an easier way to comprehend what we're doing and how it can benefit you or benefit an individual resident.
Through the mayor to the councillor, I think this is the best slide, that if we could get to our goals in current value dollars, I know that sounds complicated, but like it's a point in time. At this point in time, you would move towards or slightly better than the LAM average. Like that, like if we hit the targets that we set by 2024, remember that's a long time, like a lot of work to be done, but it is very realistic. If you hit those targets, you'd be back at or better than those LAM targets. But the investment to get there, it's a long road, and that's the complexity. And I think, and the Director of Public Works can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is a third of the city has a designed storm sewer system, which means there is a complexity, which some councillors have been saying for a long time. We need to build storm sewers so the water has a place to go. And we do that. And because of that, many houses were built in the city where they never had to contribute to a storm sewer system when the house was built. Unfortunately, now we have to charge them for that storm sewer system. But instead of it in 1960 or 50 or whenever the house was built, we're charging them in today's dollars it's almost too bad that we can't split out the bill and say, this is what your storm sewer cost is, and this is because you don't have a storm sewer and we have to charge you today. It's a really real situation.
Counselor? Okay, further questions? Counselor Nash?
So, I brought my water bills with me, and like, it's all about the money, right? So, water fixed charges, wastewater charges, residential unit, $119.96, call it $120 a month. So with the increase, no improvement in the quality of, no increase in pressure or any of that stuff, you're looking now, we're saying about $135, correct? If we put that 12% on that?
Yeah, through the mayor to the councillor, I have about, on my rate slide, I'll find the rate slide, but it's about $16 extra a month for the average user. That's what they'll pay.
Yeah, we just keep dipping into people's pockets here, but what are we gonna do?
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. So with regards to what we pay the region, and I know you and I have had this discussion, and it's something that we need to go to the region to discuss. In looking at our wastewater plant in Port Colborne, we send the region about $5.5 million per year. Our understanding, and again, we want to make sure this is 100% correct, but our understanding on the information we've received so far is the cost to operate that plant is about $2.5 million. I'm close on that?
Through the mayor, I've heard that number. Whether that's the final number, I don't know. But what I would say is that there's a probability, whether it's 2.5 or 3 or however that works out, that the fixed cost to run that plant might be less than what we actually pay in our system, regardless of what that actual number is.
Exactly. So to me, that's something that we need to go back to the region and discuss. There was a formula, and it was changed a number of times back in around 2010, 2013. And it was a formula that a number of municipalities paid. For the life of me, I don't understand why, because quite frankly, the more, and I'll call it clean water, so the infiltration that goes into that plant, the cost to clean that is minimal compared to, so if you send it 1 million gallons a year or 2 million gallons a year, the difference in cost is very minimal. The one thing about our plant is that it's not near capacity, which is a good thing. So our growth, it can handle our growth. But when you have storm situations, in not, if they have to use more of the plant during that period of time for a week or so, when the storm starts, by the time it dissipates, the cost to actually run the plant is not much more. Because during our water budget at the region, I looked at what Pelham pays. Pelham's slightly smaller than us, but not a lot. They don't have a sewer plant, but they have to pay for the system. So they have to pay for a plant that they're going to, which I believe is the majority of them goes to Welland. They should be paying, quite frankly, close to us on an even keel. I know we have the lake, and I know we have the water comes up and down from the lake, and it does pop into our system. But their cost for wastewater was astronomically cheaper than ours, and I don't know how that is. So I know Brian and I have talked about that. We will be having a meeting with the region, because quite frankly, it doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't sit right to me. And I know these have been happening in the past when Mayor Badaway was here. I'm not sure about when Mayor Maloney was here, if he had any conversations with regards to that. But these are questions that we're asking them now. We're trying to gather the actual facts and the right information so that we can say to them, guys, like, there's something afoot here, because I think we're sending it, quite frankly, too much money. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but we've both looked at each other in our meetings and said, we think we're paying the region too much money. And if you look at around of the 11 municipalities that have water and sewer, we know why Fort Erie and us are a little bit higher because of the lake, is what they're saying is the clean water going into the system is why Fort Erie and Port Colborne's rates are almost identical on the sewer side of things. I'm still not convinced on what they've told us, both Mayor Redekop and I'm not convinced that the other thing they were supposed to do is come down and start in Port Colborne and Fort Erie with regards to looking at their mains to make sure leaks weren't happening there, both on the sewer side and the water side. But here I want to talk about sewer. So that is something that Brian and I will be going to the region and talking about. It needs to happen, because it's not sitting well with me, and I've gone through a number of budgets as our numbers have grown through what they're charging us to run that plant. So, Councillor.
I just think the whole situation and the way that's charged, I mean, it seems to me that if you're building a giant expansion in Niagara Falls of its treatment plant, that they aren't charging enough there, because if they had full cost recovery, they would build in replacement costs. And so they're not. So I'm concerned that your numbers are probably dead on, but is the $2.5 million that it should cost, is the region even putting in an amount for replacement of the plant? Because they sure as heck can't be when they need to replace a plant or add a plant in Niagara Falls. It should cost no more, because the money was either supposed to be put aside from growth to pay for the plant, or the amount they're charging should be a sustainability rate. When the plant expires, the money's there. So I don't even think they could probably make an argument they're not charging enough and they got to pay catch up, because you can't have a new plant being needed and everybody's rate in the region comes up if you're charging full cost recovery. So I think it's for somebody like Mr. Bowles to blow a hole through that. But at the end of the day, I think there's some, if there's not smoke and mirrors in there, there's some things that aren't being told in the number.
Yeah, I mean, historically, they haven't collected enough for their reserves, but this is a brand new plant, and the reason why it's going in is the new hospital is one of the biggest reasons, and the growth in that area between Thorold and Niagara Falls and the future of Fort Erie. That's really the reason. So I'm sure in their budgeting over the last 20 years, let's say, they didn't really anticipate that plant, because based on their outlook, they didn't know the new hospital was going to go there, and all of a sudden that area was going to boom on Montrose. But DCs should, yeah. So, I mean, and DCs are going into portions of it. It'll actually save money in other areas. They're going to get rid of, I think, 3 to 5 pumping stations and things like that. So, but I think it's 800 million, I think it is, Brian. I can't remember the final number on that plan.
I think it's a little lower. I haven't followed it closely, but I think it's...
Oh, maybe 385 million?
500 in that area, but don't quote me.
It's not cheap.
Yeah.
But, I mean, 20 years ago, they probably didn't think about this. So, but I agree with you. But they'll tell you at our meetings is that if Port Colborne plant was to cease operation tomorrow because of its age, they don't have the monies in reserves, because they haven't been piling it away in reserves, because rates, quite frankly, have been kept artificially low on that portion of it. So, I mean, and that's one thing the region's got to battle with, and that's why you're seeing over that 10-year plan, you're seeing a 5% on water and 10 on sewer, is try to get those reserves up and get things fixed faster. I mean, we should have spent more back in the 80s and 90s here and parts of the 2000s. But again, that's kind of the water under the bridge portion. But back to the cost of our sewer plant. That's one thing Brian and I have discussed on numerous occasions. we're waiting to see what happened this year with their budgeting, so that's been done. So now we can go down there and say, guys, you know, you're gonna have to convince us. So, and see how that formula is done, because as I said, you know, you look at a couple of the other municipalities that are similar size to us and what their sewer costs are, they should be similar to ours. So, Ryan?
I appreciate the extra time to talk on this. I just want to be clear, like the region's billing system as approved, they bill it correctly. It's as they bill it and they bill it correctly. And the region will need to increase their fees because plants across the region, pipes across the region, everything will need to go up. So that's where that is. But I think as what Mayor Steele is referring to is, and you can see that here, the reason why we're pushing infrastructure so much is because volume going to the plant impacts what we pay the region. But when you read the region's budget, the region will say that their costs of running the wastewater system are fixed. They don't fluctuate based on volume. So if the region's costs don't fluctuate based on volume, why do they charge you based on volume? That's the question that the mayor and I and the CAO and council, I think, we need to have that discussion because we're in a race to try to take a system that it has 1/3 of the city with a designed storm sewer, almost a combined system in many ways, and trying to remove that water. And this city's trying to do everything it can right now to improve its system. Well, it does that. And it's hard to be on both sides paying for volume when volume doesn't impact the cost of the system. At the same time, you're trying to remove the volume because we have goals to be good for the planet, good for the environment. We want to pull all of that and we want to clean. So it's about finding that balance, whether it be equity or equality within the system. That just becomes the question, and it's a difficult question because billing for water, wastewater is a complicated topic that's been discussed at the region for a lot of years.
So Brian and I'll take that forward to their staff and get some answers. Go ahead.
Just a quick question about that. Can a lower tier municipality ask for an audit of the water wastewater system? And us in particular, along with Fort Erie, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're the only two municipalities in Niagara that have standalone water wastewater because our plants service just us. Fort Erie's plants just service Fort Erie. We don't send water to anybody else and we don't take wastewater from anybody else, do we? It's just a closed circuit for the city of Port Colborne, full stop.
Yeah, Pelham and Thorold send it elsewhere.
Niagara Falls, or St. Catharines and Thorold share.
Well, Thorold goes to Niagara Falls and St.
Niagara Falls, yeah.
They go to two. Grimsby, I think, takes in both Grimsby and Beamsville, and West Lincoln, I'm not sure where, if they have their own plant. I don't know.
Yeah, so we basically have our own system.
We're the only two that are self-sufficient.
Yeah, standalone. So
Yeah.
why can't we ask the region for an audit?
It's not really an audit that we want, it's the formula they use to charge us. Like, water's easy. We know how many gallons come out of the plant, we know, and then how much we bill. So if there's a leak along the way, whether it's our leak or the region's leak, and that's why Mayor Redekop and I last year got a pass that they do a study on their mains, because, you know, that main goes from their plant, how far, Steve, approximately, or how many kilometers of mains would they have in Port Colborne that they operate on water side?
So I don't have an exact number, but it does travel all the way down Fielden, it crosses the canal, and then up towards Kalali and down Elizabeth and circles back towards Chippewa, so it is quite significant.
So if that's leaking, we're paying for it. They don't have an annual or biannual or every so many years. They don't check those pipes. So we've asked them to do it. It was passed by council, so they have to do it. I don't know if they've been in to do ours. There's your answer is no. So that'll be a question I'll be taking there. Why hasn't that been done? It's been almost a year, guys. Why hasn't it been done? So, because to me that's important. If they're losing X amount of gallons, guess who I'm sending a bill to? It's the region, because why should our ratepayers pay for their loss? Although it's all one system, but still, that should be spread amongst the 500,000 people that live in Niagara, not just the 20-some-odd thousand in Colborne.
Yeah.
So, anyways, those are arguments that we are having down there, so. But that's where we take it back to them and say, look, the sewer formula is not, in our minds, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't. And I remember when Vance was here, it was changed a number of times. And it would go back and forth and back and forth. And I mean, some of you guys around this table, well, specifically Gary and maybe even, Ronnie for sure, Frank, like it was very confusing when it was brought back to us. And, well, you were there, how it was done. So anyways, we're trying to get to the bottom. We're trying to get it right. We're hoping that in the long run that it'll, again, help with our costs. As Brian said, we can control our costs, but if the region costs are still going up, that means we're passing that along to our ratepayer without our control. So this is something we might be able to control. So.
Mayor, if I could just I have every confidence in the region's accounting ability, how they're doing it, the allocations, it's all great. The question, if council was to ask one, is exactly what the mayor said. It's one on equity. It's equity on the billing system. And they've had great and very sophisticated reviews, third-party reviews of their billing system. But I think if this council was to ask a question, it's just about the equity of how it's allocated. If their costs are fixed, then why do we, the city, pay a cost that's variable based on our flows?
Yeah, it's not the audited portion, it's the formula. Yeah. Okay, so there is a motion on the floor. Further questions? All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. So now we have item 4.2, the 2024 rates setting. That's report 2023-165. Do you have a whole, you just want me to put this on the floor then?
Yes, please, Mayor.
Okay. So if I could have Councilors Aquilina and Beauregard. Move that Committee of the Whole recommend to Council the Corporate Services Report 2023-165 be received, that the 2024 water and wastewater rates as outlined in Corporate Services Department Report 2023-165 be approved, and that the 2024 storm sewer rates as outlined in Corporate Services Department 2023-165 be approved, and that the draft bylaw attached as Appendix A of Corporate Services Report 2023-165 be brought forward to Council for consideration. Do you want comments, or you just want to go directly to questions? Because really it's everything you've already talked about.
Yeah, through the mayor, it is everything we've already talked about, and the last two slides in the last presentation talked about the only changes to how we would bill rates.
Further questions? All in favor? That's carried. No correspondence, no presentations. Any delegations? Anybody want to speak to the water budget that's here? None. Procedural motions, information items, none. At this point, the public meeting of our water wastewater budget meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.